The Mavericks are on the have been close to on the verge of needing to forfeit.
Hey, they're a player away from having a forfeit.
They're tanking so much that they're at war with their fans, that they are doing everything possible to alienate their fans is because they want to move the team.
Nico Harrison has completely destroyed the Dallas Mavericks in more ways than one. Not only did he trade away the heart and soul of Dallas, but he's completely ruined a championship level team by forcing his star players to play the entire game, trading away young breakout players, and has constructed a roster that might have to forfeit games because they physically can't even compete on the court. Why would Nico Harrison do this? How did the Dallas Mavericks get to this point? Could we have seen this coming? But more importantly, what if I told you that the Dallas Mavericks and Nico Harrison are doing this all on purpose? Before we get to the content, we launched our third video on Uni Diamond Talk, our new baseball channel. We're giving away 10 copies of MLB The Show 25 to a subscriber that turns on our notifications on that channel. Now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. Today's video is sponsored by PrizePicks. We've been having a dominant run making easy money on our NBA props that I give away on my Instagram at TheFlightMike and on my Patreon at Microphone. Make sure you use my promo code Microphone to get $50 when you make a play of $5 or more, or just click in the link in the description down below. And thank you, PrizePicks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Before we talk about why the Dallas Mavericks are on the verge of forfeiting games, I want to talk about Nico Harrison's tenure with the Dallas Mavericks entirely and see whether or not this is something that we could have seen coming. Nico Harrison was hired as the general manager of the Dallas Mavericks back in 2021 and inherited a team that had just been bounced out of the first round in back-to-back seasons. His first move was to hire Jason Kidd, which to be fair was a good decision. But aside from that, Nico Harrison was in a good situation. He was inheriting a roster filled with talent. In Harrison's first year as GM of the Mavs, he of course had Luka Doncic, but also Jalen Brunson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Kristaps Porzingis, Dwight Powell, and Tim Hardaway Jr. This roster just had talent everywhere on the court, but mid-season, Nico Harrison made his first move, shipping off Kristaps Porzingis to the Washington Wizards in exchange for Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. I know that on paper this trade seems bad, and in hindsight it certainly was not a good trade, but let's take a look at the situation. Porzingis had just missed the entire 2018-19 season, and although he was a perennial 20 points per game scorer since going to Dallas, he only played 57 games for Dallas the following season and had only managed to suit up 34 times for the team. Porzingis' fit alongside Luka Doncic as the number 2 scorer on this offense was very questionable, and he didn't really look that great before being shipped off for Dinwiddie, who was a guy who certainly had a history of playing more games, but he himself was also coming off of a torn ACL in 2020. Question the trade all you want, it doesn't matter because it seemingly worked out for Dallas. At the time, Nico Harrison was perceived as a genius for making this trade. Luka Doncic and Jalen Brunson helped lead the Mavericks all the way to the Western Conference Finals before losing to the eventual NBA champion Golden State Warriors. This is when the first questionable move of Nico's tenure occurs. Going into the offseason, the Mavericks didn't re-sign Jalen Brunson and allowed him to walk away in free agency to the New York Knicks. By the way, let me emphasize the point that Jalen Brunson even came out and said this.
I really did want to stay in Dallas, and so, but they were like, we want to see where we're at, like 20, 25 games into the season. But we were like, all right, well, if we're not going to do it, I kind of don't want to do it until after the season. I'm not trying to think about this.
During the season, right?
Yeah.
Now, I know at the end of the day, it just came down to the salary cap, and Dallas not wanting to spend the money on a second ball handler in Jalen Brunson. Even Mark Cuban said they never got a real chance to re-sign Jalen Brunson. But I imagine that if the Mavericks knew what Brunson was capable of and saw what he would end up doing in New York, I'd like to think that Nico Harrison would clear the space and at least make a competitive offer to keep Brunson in Texas. But obviously, that's not what ended up happening. Instead, midway through the next season, Nico Harrison once again convinced us he was a genius by doing this.
The Brooklyn Nets are trading Kyrie Irving to the Dallas Mavericks. That's been confirmed by our Bill Ryder. The Mavs, in return, will receive Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, and a package of picks.
I think in hindsight, it would be easy for a lot of fans to look back and say something like,
Mike, why would the Dallas Mavericks trade such a massive haul for a second ball handler who just turned 30 instead of signing Jalen Brunson to a $100 $200 million contract.
And I think that's a good point. I'm going to give Nico Harrison a pass once again, and let me tell you why. Everyone knew Jalen Brunson's numbers would inflate once he got to the New York Knicks now that he was a #1 option. The shocking part was nobody knew they would inflate this much, and that he would be able to maintain those eye-popping statistics while being so efficient. But if you want to criticize Nico Harrison for this decision, I would totally understand why. And we'll talk about how this decision will come back to haunt him years later in just a little bit. But for now, another reason I'm okay giving a Nico a pass on this decision is because a year after this trade, the Dallas Mavericks found themselves in the NBA Finals, just one series win away from holding a Larry O'Brien trophy. I think that any decision that ends up landing your team that close to an NBA championship is a pretty good one. But that's enough of Nico Harrison's past. It's time to talk about how he single-handedly got rid of not only the team's identity, but their young stars, their bench, their fans, and arguably ruined Kyrie Irving's career. We all know that Nico Harrison would infamously trade Luka Doncic to the Lakers for Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and a future first-round pick. But I don't want to talk about that too much. We already have a full breakdown and commentary on the trade itself, and if you're interested in that, you can go check it out. Instead, I want to talk about everything else that the Mavericks have done this season. First off, let's just talk about the repercussions of the trade itself. We could talk about the irony of Nico Harrison saying he was concerned about Luka playing long-term, then Anthony Davis getting hurt in his first game as a Dallas Maverick, or Lakers fans chanting "Thank you, Nico" during a Lakers-Mavs matchup post-trade. But I mainly want to focus on how this trade affected the entire roster, how it might have ruined Kyrie Irving's career, how the Mavericks might have just pulled a Jalen Brunson 2.0. And you might be thinking, Mike, what are you talking about? The Dallas Mavericks haven't undervalued a player other than Luka Doncic this year since Jalen Brunson. But do you remember very shortly after when I made a video saying that the Dallas Mavericks made another terrible trade? Well, it didn't take that long to prove my point to be true. Quentin Grimes was acquired by the Dallas Mavericks for Tim Hardaway Jr. in the offseason and legitimately was a solid role player for the team, but he ended up getting shipped off to Philadelphia at the trade deadline for Caleb Martin. The reason I'm saying the Mavericks might have just pulled off another Jalen Brunson scenario is because in Grimes' last 9 games, he's averaging nearly 30 points per game, over 5 rebounds, over 4 assists, all while shooting a lights out 41% from 3 on nearly 7 attempts per game. Now, obviously this is a small sample size. This is a Philadelphia 76ers team that is without Joel Embiid and recently without Paul George. And we just made a separate video on that right before this upload. But let's be so serious. At this point, would anyone be shocked if Nico Harrison just gave the Philadelphia 76ers a franchise guard for Caleb Martin, who by the way has also been hurt since coming to Dallas? But it's not just him. The Dallas Mavericks truly got a dose of their bad karma, going on this slanderous press tour to try to save face and failing miserably. It seems like the Mavericks may have just gotten a dose of terrible karma. I mean, it wasn't just Caleb Martin that got hurt. Dante Exum broke his hand. Olivier Maxence Prosper broke his wrist. Daniel Gafford sprained his MCL. Anthony Davis has an abductor strain. Derek Lively has an ankle fracture. Kyrie Irving tore his ACL. Wait, does that say Kyrie Irving tore his ACL? We'll get to that in a second because that deserves its own portion in this video. But the Mavericks injuries have gotten so bad recently that they might have to start forfeiting games.
The Mavericks are on the have been close to on the verge of needing to forfeit.
Hey, they're a player away from having a forfeit.
Can you explain why?
You got to have 8 to play. And if you don't have 8 available players, then by league rule.
Let me be clear, I don't think this will happen, as Tim McMahon goes on to explain in the clip that the Mavericks would just dress a player without actually playing them if it actually does come down to that. But it honestly just highlights Nico Harrison's inability to build a healthy roster and create a contender, even though that was his main reason for trading Luka Doncic. When Luka Doncic originally was traded by the Dallas Mavericks, Nico Harrison was trying to tell Dallas Mavericks fans that this was an all-in move to win now, even famously saying,
if you pair him with Kyrie and the rest of the guys, he fits right along with our time frame to win now and win in the future. And the future to me is 3-4 years from now. The future 10 years from now, I don't know. I don't think they probably bury me and Jay by then. Or we bury ourselves. Yes.
But also keep in mind that Nico Harrison had the audacity to say this after everything.
I'm sorry they're frustrated, but when we win, I believe the frustration will go away.
It's actually kind of a sick joke. Like, hey, let's trade Luka because he's fat and out of shape and he won't play consistently. And oh, by the way, half of our roster is about to get injured, including, as previously mentioned, Kyrie Irving, who you can make a real argument only tore his ACL because of what Nico Harrison did. What am I talking about? Well, Luka Doncic played his last ever game as a Dallas Maverick on Christmas Day of 2024. Sorry, Mavs fans, that must have been a very rough present. But since that date of March 1st, which was Kyrie Irving's final full game with the Dallas Mavericks before tearing his ACL, Kyrie Irving has been playing nearly 40 minutes per game. Keep in mind he was doing this while carrying the entire offensive load of the Dallas Mavericks. This man averaged over 20 shots per game, all while playing nearly 40 minutes per game, as he's about to turn 32 years old. Are you kidding me? I mean, you don't have to be a genius to know this is a recipe for disaster. And I'm convinced that this was clear sabotage at this point. Obviously, we don't know for certain, but Nico Harrison constructing a roster where the entire offense goes through a soon-to-be 32-year-old hyper-athletic point guard who hasn't been used to carrying an entire offense since he was in Boston back in 2019 has to be one of the dumbest things I think I've ever seen in my life. And bear in mind, this includes the Russell Westbrook trade that the Lakers made for no reason at all whatsoever in the summer of 2021. This includes the Brooklyn Nets trading James Harden for Ben Simmons. This includes the Phoenix Suns trading for Bradley Beal. For that reason, you can legitimately make the argument that Nico Harrison is responsible for Kyrie Irving's torn ACL, or at the very least responsible for the conditions in which the injury occurred. Honestly, I don't know what the future holds for Dallas. I'd love to see what Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis can do as a duo when they're healthy, but I think the issue is they'll never be healthy for long stretches of time. But who knows? Maybe they are. But then you need to worry about whether or not Kyrie Irving will ever be the same after his torn ACL. On one hand, ACL surgeries have come a long way since the inception of them, and the way they affect players isn't even close to what Derrick Rose had to overcome when he tore his ACL versus the Philadelphia 76ers. But it's just a scary thing to think about when you think of Kyrie Irving, a player who's primarily known for his athleticism, his dribble moves, his shiftiness, and having anything that could compromise that would without a doubt affect the rest of his career. It's just a really unfortunate situation for Mavericks fans because keep in mind, this team had just made the NBA Finals last season, but for some reason, Nico Harrison just had to ruin a good situation. It's almost like he did it on purpose or something. No, wait, maybe, just maybe, he did do it on purpose.
The Dallas Mavericks are not moving to Las Vegas. There is no question in that. That is the answer unequivocally.
You just heard the Dallas Mavericks governor, Patrick Dumont, the new voice of the Dallas Mavericks ever since Mark Cuban sold the team to the Adelsons. But to be honest, I don't really care what he says. Of course he's gonna say something like that. He can't just openly say something like,
Oh yeah, guys, we're gonna move to Las Vegas.
all of the signs point to this being the case. Isolate your existing fan base, shed salary, start from a clean slate. Plus, how can we believe a word that guy says after he said something like this?
Jordan, Bird, Magic, Kobe, Shaq, they worked really hard every day with a singular focus to win. And if you don't have that, then it doesn't work.
First off, Shaq? Really? You decided to put Shaq on a list of guys who have a notorious work ethic? The same guy who would, in his own words, play into shape during the season? Really? Second off, I know it's funny to say Luka is fat and out of shape, but let's be serious for a second. Anyone who is averaging a nearly 30-point triple-double is not fat, and if they are, who cares? This strategy the Mavs are using is the exact same strategy the Oakland Athletics did in baseball before moving to Las Vegas. Plus, the Mavericks' new owner, Miriam Adelson's family, made their wealth in Las Vegas casinos. They already have a connection to the city. I honestly would not be very shocked if we see this franchise in Vegas by 2030. And for that, I feel terrible for Mavs fans and the entire city of Dallas. These last few months have been a prime example of how to not only ruin a franchise, but isolate the fan base that would have done anything for their team. It's really unfortunate and sad to see this happen to a team like the Dallas Mavericks. But who knows? Maybe you're one of those crazy people who sees Nico Harrison's delusional future. Me personally, I don't think it's it's Nico Harrison voluntarily doing all this. You don't go from making sneaky moves like trading Kristaps Porzingis for Spencer Dinwiddie and trading for an undervalued Kyrie Irving to shipping off Luka Doncic just because you think he's fat. I think this had to come from higher up, but unfortunately for Nico, he has no choice but to take the blame for it. Let me know in the comment section down below what do you guys think about all this. Do you think the Dallas Mavericks deserve their bad karma? Aside from that, I don't know if you heard, but the end of Paul George is here. We made a separate video on that and left it in the end screen. I'm gonna meet you guys there. I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.